A house of silence. The Reed mansion looked grand from the outside, but inside it carried a silence that was heavy and cold. Alexander Reed, a billionaire known for his sharp business mind, lived here with his only son Maxwell. Months ago, the house was filled with warmth and music, mostly because of Elena Alexander's wife and Maxwell's mother. But Elena's sudden death left a wound that no wealth, no power, and no success could ever heal. For Alexander, it was unbearable. For Maxwell, who was only 8 years old, it was even worse. He did not just lose his mother. He lost his laughter, his words, and his sense of life. Maxwell had been a cheerful boy before the tragedy, always talking, always smiling, always pulling his mother's hand to show her something new. Now he rarely spoke at all. He spent most of his time sitting near the big window in his room, holding the cowboy hat his mother had given him. He would press it to his chest as if it could bring her back. The staff whispered that he had lost his voice, not because he couldn't speak, but because he had no reason to. Alexander tried to comfort him in his own way, but the father's grief made him distant, and the boy only drifted further into silence. Maya Williams, a young maid in the Reed household, noticed all of this. She had been working for the family for 2 years, quiet and humble, doing her duties without complaint. But she was different from the other staff. She had a softness in her eyes, a way of seeing people beyond their wealth or status. And when she saw Maxwell sitting alone every day, she felt something stir inside her heart. She too knew what grief was like, though she had buried her own pain deep. One evening, thunder roared outside and the storm rattled the windows. Maya walked past Maxwell's room and heard faint sobs. Her hand froze on the doorknob. She knew staff weren't supposed to cross boundaries, but her heart would not let her walk away. She stepped inside and found the boy curled under his blanket, shaking, whispering, "Mommy, Mommy, don't go." The sight broke her. Slowly, she sat on the edge of his bed, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Maxwell turned, his eyes swollen with tears. "You're not Mommy," he whispered. His voice was soft but filled with pain. "I know, sweetheart," Maya said softly. "I can't be your mommy, but I can be here with you. You don't have to cry alone." For a moment, the boy hesitated. Then, with the hesitation of a child longing for comfort, he leaned into her arm. His small body shook as tears soaked her dress, but eventually his breathing steadied and he fell asleep in her care. Maya stayed there the whole night, watching over him as the storm raged outside. The next morning, Maxwell came down for breakfast without being called. He sat at the table quietly, but when Maya passed him a glass of juice, he whispered, "Thank you." It was the first time in weeks he had spoken a word. Alexander noticed, surprise flickering across his tired face. He didn't say anything, but deep inside he wondered if this maid had reached his son in a way he himself could not, and so began the fragile change. The silence in the Reed mansion was still there, but now, for the first time, it had been broken not by wealth, not by power, but by the quiet act of a maid who refused to let a boy drown in grief. Boundaries and walls, the days that followed, showed small but important changes. Maxwell still spent hours near the window with his cowboy hat, but sometimes he would look for Maya when she tidied his room. He followed her with quiet steps, watching her fold clothes or place books neatly on the shelves. Once, when she hummed a soft lullaby, he whispered, "Can you sing it again?" It was the first time anyone in the house had heard him request something since Elena's death, but Alexander noticed this closeness, and though part of him felt relief, another part felt unsettled. He told himself it was about boundaries. To him, staff had their place efficient, respectful, invisible in family matters. But here was Maya, reaching into places that even he, the boy's father, could not. It made him feel powerless. And Alexander Reed was not a man who tolerated powerlessness. One evening he returned early from a meeting. As he stepped into the hallway, he froze at the sound of laughter, bright, innocent, echoing off the walls. He hadn't heard that sound in months. Following the noise, he found Maya crawling on the floor with Maxwell riding on her back, a cowboy hat tilted over his small face, shouting, "Giddy up!" The sight should have warmed him, but instead, his chest tightened with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? Alexander's voice was sharp, commanding. Maya froze, startled. Maxwell slipped down from her back, the laughter vanishing from his face as quickly as it had come. Maya rose slowly, steadying the boy. He wanted to play, she said quietly. I was making sure he was safe. Safe? Alexander's eyes narrowed. You think letting my son climb on your back like some circus act is safe? What if he fell? What if he hurt himself? His words cut like glass, filled not only with fear but with pride. Maya held his gaze, her voice firm but respectful. He hasn't laughed like this in weeks. He hasn't even spoken much since the funeral. If playing for a few minutes lets him feel joy again, then it's worth more than the risk of a stumble. Alexander's jaw tightened. You are overstepping. He is my son, not yours. And he is hurting, Maya replied softly, though her words carried strength. Something you would see if you allowed yourself. The room fell into heavy silence. Maxwell's small hand clutched the edge of Maya's dress, his eyes wide and fearful. Without another word, Alexander stepped forward, scooped his son into his arms, and muttered, Enough. The boy's smile was gone, his arms limp as Alexander carried him away. Maya stood rooted, her heart aching not for herself but for the child whose fragile laughter had been stolen in an instant. That night the mansion returned to its old stillness. But later a scream shattered the silence. Mommy! Maxwell cried in his sleep, thrashing under the blankets, his voice raw with grief. Alexander rushed into the room, but he froze, helpless as his son sobbed. Maya, hearing the cry, didn't hesitate. She hurried in, sat on the edge of the bed, and took Maxwell's trembling hands into her own. I'm here, sweetheart, she whispered gently. You're safe. You're not alone. The boy clung to her desperately, burying his face in her chest, his sobs slowing until sleep finally returned. Alexander stood in the shadows, watching, his throat tight. When Maya rose, she looked at him with quiet strength. He doesn't need perfection, sir. He needs presence. If you're going to fire me for doing what's right, then so be it. But I will not stand by while he drowns in silence. She left the room, her footsteps echoing with defiance. And Alexander, left behind, felt something he hadn't allowed. Himself in a long-time shame, a shared grief. The next few days carried a fragile tension inside the mansion. Alexander kept his distance from Maya, his pride still wounded by her bold words. He gave her short instructions, avoided lingering in the same room, and buried himself in work. But he could not ignore what he had seen, his son clinging to her, whispering mommy in his sleep, soothed only by her presence. It unsettled him because it showed a truth he did not want to face. Someone else was giving his son the comfort he himself had failed to provide. Maxwell, however, gravitated toward Maya more and more. He still held on to silence much of the day. But when he was with her, small cracks began to form. He asked little questions, made small jokes, and sometimes even smiled. One afternoon they sat under the oak tree in the garden. Maxwell had brought his crayons and notebook, his small hands moving clumsily across the page. He drew 3 figures himself, his mother with long hair, and beside them a taller shape that he left unfinished. Who is this? Maya asked gently, pointing to the blank outline. That's Daddy, Maxwell said, his voice quiet. But I don't know how to draw him smiling. I don't remember what that looks like anymore. His little face crumpled and he looked away quickly, embarrassed. Maya's chest tightened. She brushed a curl from his forehead and said softly, It's okay. Sometimes when people are sad, they forget how to show smiles, but that doesn't mean they don't love you. Maxwell hesitated, then asked in a whisper, Miss Maya, did you ever lose someone you loved? The question struck deep. For a long moment, Maya could not speak. Memories rose up, the sterile smell of a hospital, the sound of machines beeping and then falling silent, the weight of her daughter Leia slipping away in her arms. She rarely spoke of it, not to anyone. But when she looked at Maxwell's small, tear-bright eyes, she knew the truth was the only gift she could give. Yes, she said finally, her voice low but steady. I lost my little girl. Her name was Leia. She was younger than you when she got very sick, and one day she had to leave just like your mommy did. Maxwell's eyes widened. He reached for her hand without thinking, his small fingers curling into hers. "Did it hurt?" he asked softly. "It hurt more than anything I can explain," Maya replied, her throat tightening. "And sometimes it still hurts. But I learned something, Max. Even when people we love leave, their love doesn't leave us. It stays right here." She pressed her hand gently over his chest. "As long as we remember them, talk about them, dream about them, they're never truly gone." The boy stared down at his chest as though trying to feel that love still there. "Do you think Mommy hears me when I talk to her at night?" he whispered. Maya swallowed back her tears and nodded firmly. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe she does. And I believe she wants you to laugh again. She wants you to live because that's what love always wants for us." Maxwell leaned into her, resting his head on her arm, comforted by the knowledge that someone else understood his pain. What neither of them knew was that Alexander had returned, early from work that day. He stood at the upstairs window of his study, watching them beneath the oak tree. He saw his son lean against Maya, saw her speaking with gentle honesty, and felt something twist inside him, jealousy, admiration, guilt, all tangled together. He envied that she could reach Maxwell where he could not, admired the courage it took to bear her own wounds, and felt guilt for not being able to do the same. That evening at dinner, Maxwell looked up suddenly and said, "Daddy, Miss Maya told me something today. She said Mommy's love didn't go away. She said it's still here." He pressed his small hand over his chest. "Do you believe that, Daddy?" Alexander froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His throat tightened, his eyes flicking to Maya, who sat quietly, waiting. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then Alexander spoke, his voice low but true. "Yes, Max, I believe that. I feel it every day." Maxwell smiled faintly, the first genuine smile Alexander had seen from him in months. It was small, fragile, but real. And as Alexander looked across the table, meeting Maya's steady gaze, he realized something had changed. The silence in their house was no longer unbreakable. It had cracked, and through those cracks, light was beginning to shine. The moment that changed everything, the weeks that followed, were a fragile balance of light and shadow. Maxwell was speaking. More now, his laughter returning in short bursts that lifted the weight from the house. Yet the grief was never gone entirely. It lingered in Alexander's eyes, in the way Maxwell sometimes whispered to his mother at night, in the heaviness that settled in quiet moments when all words seemed to fail. And though Alexander had softened slightly, his pride still built walls around him. He respected Maya's influence on his son, but he kept her at arm's length, refusing to admit aloud how much she had done. Then came the afternoon that broke those walls apart. It was a bright day, the kind of autumn afternoon, where golden leaves swirled in the wind like falling stars. Maxwell was in the garden, chasing butterflies with a net in one hand and his cowboy hat on his head. Maya watched him closely from the patio, smiling as he darted across the grass with childlike excitement. For the first time his laughter rang out freely, unburdened. But in an instant, everything changed. Maxwell ran toward the koi pond at the edge of the garden. The stones along the border were damp with morning dew, slick and treacherous. His small foot slipped, and he toppled forward, his arms flailing. "Maxwell!" Maya screamed, launching herself across the yard. Time seemed to slow, the boy's cowboy hat flying from his head, his arms reaching desperately, the sharp edge of the stone waiting. With a burst of strength born only of love, Maya grabbed him by the waist just as his body pitched forward. She pulled him back, falling to her knees as they landed on the grass. Both trembling, her heart hammering violently in her chest, Maxwell burst into sobs, clinging to her with all his strength. "Don't let go!" he cried, his small voice shaking. "I won't, sweetheart," Maya whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around him. "I'll never let go." At that moment, the glass doors to the house slammed open. Alexander came rushing out, his face pale, his chest heaving with fear. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice sharper than intended. Maxwell, still crying, pointed with his little hand. "Daddy, I almost fell." "Miss Maya saved me." His words broke into hiccups as he buried his face in her shoulder again. Alexander froze, his eyes darting between his son and Maya. she sat on the grass. Knees scraped, clothes muddied, her arms wrapped around Maxwell with a look of fierce determination and love. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The truth was clear. She hadn't just been saving his son today. She had been saving him every single day since Elena's death. Something inside Alexander cracked then, completely and irreversibly. All his pride, all his distance, all the excuses. He had used to keep himself closed off. None of it could withstand what he had just witnessed. This woman had risked everything for his child, without hesitation, without thought for herself. She had given what he, for all his wealth and power, could not: safety, comfort, hope, that night. After Maxwell was asleep, Alexander found Maya in the laundry room, folding towels as though nothing had happened. For a long time he stood in the doorway, silent. Finally he spoke, his voice lower, softer than she had ever heard it. "I've been a fool." Maya looked up, startled. She set down the towel slowly. "Sir?" He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Tonight you didn't just save my son from falling. You've been saving him every day in ways I never saw or never let myself see, and I treated you as though you were nothing more than help." "I was wrong." Maya's expression softened, though her voice remained steady. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because he needs someone to hold on to. Grief takes enough from us. We shouldn't let it take the people who are still here." Alexander's eyes glistened, his chest heavy. He pressed his hand to the doorframe as if steadying himself. "You shouldn't be folding towels. You shouldn't be scrubbing floors. From today, you're not the housemaid anymore. You're Maxwell's nanny, officially." Maya blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure?" "I should have been sure a long time ago," he said firmly. For the first time since Elena's death, silence between them wasn't sharp or hostile. It was gentle, almost peaceful, filled with something new: respect, gratitude, and the faintest spark of hope. That night, Alexander sat by Maxwell's bed longer than usual. His son slept soundly, a faint smile still on his lips, his hand resting near the cowboy hat on the pillow. Alexander brushed a curl from the boy's forehead and whispered, "I'm here, Max. I'm not going anywhere." And for once, the words didn't feel like a promise he couldn't keep. They felt true. The return of laughter the morning after the near accident by the pond, the Reed mansion felt different. The sharp tension that had always clung to its walls seemed to soften, replaced by a fragile warmth. For months, the house had been silent except for echoes of grief. But now, even in the quiet, there was a hum of something new, something alive. Maxwell woke early, bursting into the kitchen in his pajamas, his cowboy hat crooked on his head. He climbed onto a stool, his eyes brighter than they had been in months. "Daddy," he said eagerly, "Miss Maya told me we can make Mommy spaghetti tonight, can we, please?" His voice carried excitement, not sadness. Alexander, seated at the counter with his untouched espresso, froze. He remembered those Tuesday nights, Elena rolling meatballs with Maxwell, Flour dusting her apron, the sound of their laughter filling the room. His throat tightened at the memory. He looked at Maya, who stood quietly by the counter, waiting for his answer. For once, Alexander didn't hesitate. "Yes, Max," he said softly, "we'll make it tonight." That evening, the kitchen came alive like never before. Aprons tied around their waists, Maxwell and Maya worked side by side, rolling meatballs into odd shapes. Flour covered Maxwell's cheeks and dotted his hair like snow. Alexander, more used to handling contracts than cooking spoons, stirred the sauce clumsily, splattering it across his shirt. Maxwell laughed so hard he nearly dropped a spoon. "Daddy, you're worse than me," he shouted, giggling until his stomach hurt. Alexander chuckled too, a rusty sound at first, but real, unforced. For the first time in months, laughter filled the Reed mansion without breaking into sorrow. When they finally sat down to eat, the table felt alive. Maxwell twirled noodles around his fork with messy determination, sauce smeared across his chin. "It tastes just like Mommy's," he declared proudly. Alexander lowered his eyes, swallowing hard. He looked at his son, then at Maya, and something shifted deep within him. For the first time, dinner didn't feel like an empty ritual. It felt like home. Over the next days, little moments like these began to grow. Maxwell's drawings no longer showed only sadness, sometimes they had stick figures of him. Maya and Alexander together under the oak tree. He brought them proudly to his father's office, interrupting meetings with sketches of Daddy the Knight or Miss Maya the Protector. At first, Alexander tried to wave him off, but one afternoon he set aside his phone, crouched down to his son's level, and asked, "Tell me about it." The boy's face lit up, and for 20 minutes Alexander simply listened. It was the most valuable deal he had ever made. Mayo noticed the change too. Alexander still carried grief, but it no longer swallowed him whole. He lingered in the mornings asking Maxwell about his dreams. He even started helping with bedtime, sometimes reading a story awkwardly while Maxwell fought sleep. Maya stood by quietly, watching a father rediscover his place. She never claimed credit, never reminded him of her words. She simply smiled, knowing that this was what Elena would have wanted for father and son to find each other again. One rainy night, Maxwell confessed to Maya, "I don't remember what Mommy's voice sounded like anymore." His eyes filled with tears. Maya gathered him close, whispering, "It's okay. Sometimes memories fade a little. But love never fades. She's still here, Max, right here." She placed her hand gently over his chest. Unknown to them, Alexander had been standing at the door, listening. Her words struck him deeply, for he too had feared forgetting. His study, he sat beside his son's bed and told him about the day he met Elena, about the first time she smiled at him. Maxwell's face glowed as he whispered, "I think I remember her laugh now, Daddy. It was a fragile healing, but it was real." One Saturday afternoon, Maxwell dragged both Maya and Alexander into the garden with a pile of blankets. "We're building a fort," he announced. Together, they draped sheets over branches of the oak tree, turning it into a castle. Inside, Maxwell crowned himself king, declared Maya the brave knight and Alexander the protector of the realm. For hours, their laughter rose into the sky, weaving through the golden leaves. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon with shades of orange, Alexander sat quietly on the patio, watching Maya chase fireflies with Maxwell. His chest ached. But for once it wasn't only grief, it was gratitude. Gratitude for his son's laughter, gratitude for the woman who had refused to give up on them, and gratitude for the fragile, imperfect, but living family that had formed out of brokenness. The house becomes a home again. Winter approached quietly, its chill seeping into the city and frosting the garden of the Reed estate. The oak tree stood bare now, its branches skeletal against the pale sky, but within the mansion there was warmth that had been absent for so long it felt almost miraculous. The silence that once haunted the halls had been replaced with the sounds of life, the rustle of crayons across paper, the bubbling laughter of an 8-year-old boy, and even, on rare occasions, the deep rumble of Alexander's own chuckle. Maxwell had grown stronger. He still spoke to his mother at night, still whispered secrets into the darkness as though she could hear him, but he no longer drowned in sorrow. Instead, he carried her memory as a light within him. Sometimes he would tug at his father's sleeve and ask, "Daddy, tell me more about Mommy." And Alexander, who once could not bear to speak her name, now shared memories with his son, the first dinner they had together, the way Elena always laughed with her whole body, the lullabies she sang when Maxwell was a baby. Each memory stitched father and son closer together, weaving healing into the places grief had torn apart. Through it all, Maya remained steady. She was Maxwell's anchor, the one he ran to when nightmares threatened, the one who coaxed him into laughter, the one who quietly mended the broken rhythm of the house. She never demanded recognition, she never asked for thanks. Yet Alexander saw. Every day he saw more clearly how she had become the heartbeat of the home he thought was lost forever. The turning point came one crisp evening when Maxwell, sitting cross-legged on the rug, announced with childlike certainty, "Daddy, Miss Maya is family now." He looked up with wide, honest eyes as if daring his father to disagree. Alexander's chest tightened. He glanced at Maya, who stood frozen by the doorway, her expression caught between shock and humility. For a long moment the room was silent. Then Alexander crouched beside his son, pulling him close. "You're right, Max," he said softly. "She is family. Later that night, after Maxwell had drifted into sleep, Alexander found Maya in the kitchen, cleaning up the remnants of dinner. He paused at the doorway, gathering the courage to speak. "You've done more for my son than I ever could have," he admitted, his voice low but sincere. "You gave him back his laughter. You gave me back my son. I don't have the right words to thank you, but I need you to know I don't see you as staff anymore, not as help. You are part of this family." Maya's eyes glistened. She had never expected such words from him, not from the man who once threatened to fire her for overstepping. She set down the dishcloth and spoke quietly. "I didn't do it for gratitude, Alexander. I did it because grief nearly destroyed me once and I couldn't let it destroy him. But if you truly mean those words, then I'll stay for Maxwell for as long as he needs me." "I mean them," Alexander said firmly, "for him and for me." From that night on, the Reed mansion was no longer just a house of marble and glass. It became a home again. Traditions were rebuilt: Tuesday spaghetti nights with flour on the counters, Saturday forts under the oak tree, bedtime stories shared between father and son. The pain of loss never vanished, but it no longer consumed them. Instead, it became part of their story, softened by love, balanced by hope. One snowy evening, Alexander stood at the window watching Maya and Maxwell chase each other across the garden, their laughter rising into the cold air like music. His chest ached, but it was no longer the ache of despair. It was the ache of healing, of gratitude, of life finding its way back. He whispered quietly, almost as if to Elena, "We're okay now, he's okay, because of her." And somewhere, in the quiet of the house, it felt as though Elena's presence lingered, not as sorrow, but as peace. For the first time in a long time, the Reed mansion was not a monument to grief. It was a place of love, laughter, and second chances. A home reborn.